Normally, I like to tell you true stories, but I have been assured by the man that I learned this story from that it is apocryphal. But why stop telling a good story just because it isn't true? Maybe, perhaps, this is more of a parable. Seems that there was a small Unitarian Universalist church in New England, and this particular church had a rather forward-looking board president who'd been thinking about what they could do to grow the church. After discussing the matter at length at a board meeting, they sent out an email to anyone in the church who was in leadership, the chair of a committee or some other position, and in it the board president urged everyone to not talk to their friends or to conduct church business after the worship service during their coffee hour. Instead, they wanted everyone who was a church leader to spend their time in coffee hour talking to new people who were visiting. The following Sunday worship, coffee hour came along, and sure enough, there were a handful of visitors who attended. The board president was a very enthusiastic young woman who couldn't wait to see her new idea spring into action. It had been her idea after all. However, as she entered the fellowship hall where coffee hour was to happen to kind of scope out unfamiliar faces to find someone to talk to, she saw Bob, who had been the church's treasurer sometime when the Mayflower ran aground. Bob was known for being something of a grump, and he was also holding court in one corner of the room with about half a dozen of his longtime buddies around him. "Bob," the perky president said to him in a very sweet voice, "don't you remember that we aren't supposed to be talking to our friends at coffee hour? We should be talking to the visitors who've come to the service today." Bob looked at this board president and said in his rather dry New England way, "I found this church the hard way, so can they." Now, one cannot help to chuckle a little bit at the familiarity of this tale. Churches, like many social gatherings, can look pretty intimidating from the outside. And while not meaning to be closed off from new people, a pre-established community like a church can seem hard to break into if you're new. This is unfortunate, not because I think churches should grow. I have no objection to church growth, to be sure, but I find that to be more a byproduct of doing our mission well, rather than as an end in itself. No, the impression of being closed, of being a closed organization, is unfortunate for churches because it gets in the way of our ministry that we are called to do. People are lonely, and they're looking for community. It's like the verse we heard in that song from the Police, "Message in a Bottle." "Walked out this morning, don't believe what I saw. 100 billion bottles washed up on the shore. Seems I'm not alone in being alone. 100 billion castaways looking for a home." I think that may be a more apt metaphor for our culture today than when it was written then. It may be the perfect metaphor, in fact, for what it's like to be in lockdown or quarantine. All of us are all together in trying to connect with each other the best we can. When asked why someone attends or continues to attend church, one of the most popular answers is community. Now, I remember a time when I used to not like that. Church isn't a country club, I thought. You can make community anywhere you want. Church is about our values and our ideals, and it's about tradition, and it's about changing the world. That was back in my naive youth in ministry. Since then, I've actually come to appreciate the answer for what it is. To find community, a place you belong, is a rare and precious thing these days that seems to be all the rarer all the time. It's no small accomplishment to provide someone who is lonely with community. When I was a kid, I usually had a small group of friends that I ran around with. And in the 4th grade, there were these two guys that I would hang out with at lunch and at the playground. And one day, late in the school year, my friends and I had some kind of falling out. I honestly don't remember what the issue was that got us all so upset, but suffice it to say, that our relationship did not recover from it. And I spent the last couple of months of that school year without my usual gang to eat with and play with. And while my memory is a little fuzzy on the specifics of what happened, I remember quite clearly the feelings of that time. I felt rejected and alone. I had no friends and wasn't even really sure how I was gonna ever make friends again. Now, mind you, I was at the ripe old age of 9 at the time. But nearly 40 years later, that loneliness in the pit of my stomach is one of my clearest memories of my childhood. The church is called to minister to that loneliness. That's why being closed off and unwelcoming, even if it is unintentional, is a major hindrance to our work. Thus, the church has to be proactive. We have to go out of our way to intentionally show people that there is a place for them here among us. We have to engage in the spiritual practice of radical hospitality. Now, radical hospitality is a term you will hear from me from time to time. I like to emphasize it as a thing we do on purpose, not by sheer accident. Radical hospitality means going out of our way to make space for the full humanity of other people. That includes physical space, of course, but it's more than that. It means making room in our hearts and to be willing to be in relationship with another person. To not fool ourselves into thinking that I've got enough friends. Why do I need one more person? All of us in the church, if we do not welcome each other, who will do it for us? And I'm not just talking about new people only. Everyone wants to feel welcomed, even if they've been a member here for years or decades. You are practicing radical hospitality anytime you're thinking of someone else's comfort and well-being ahead of your own. Again, that could mean their physical comfort or well-being, but it includes their spiritual and emotional well-being too. Radical hospitality is about making room for the full person, just as they are. It is not asking them to conform, to disguise, or to hide parts of themselves so that they can be among us. They're able to bring their full self to church, so long as it harms no one. Radical hospitality helps us to get out of our own egos and think about others first. The New Testament has an intriguing line about this. The book of Hebrews was supposedly written by Paul, but almost every scholar agrees that it was written by someone else, kind of trying to pretend to be Paul. Nevertheless, in chapter 13, verse 2, it says, "Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing so, some have entertained angels without knowing it." The traditional King James Bible had that verse as, "Some have entertained angels unaware." It's an intriguing thought. What if the person coming through the door, filling out the yellow card, logging on to Zoom, is an angel? What if we treated everyone who did as if they were? Unitarian Universalist minister Forrest Church continues this metaphor, quote, "It's easy to love those who resemble us. But if I read the scriptures right, in God's eye, such love, if essential, is not sufficient. God's challenge is to love those who are different and learn from them, male and female, black, brown, red and white, Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu, Jew, agnostic, atheist, straight and gay. None of these distinctions matter all that much, not in God's eye, not in the eye of the eternity. What matters is how we move from who we are to who we might be. We begin limited by race and sex and sexual orientation and nationality and economic status. And the sad thing is that this is also how we may end, known according to the accidents of our birth rather than the measure of our growth. Angels intervene to help us grow." End quote. Now, I'm not sure I would agree that those identities don't matter, But I do agree with Forest Church's general point that what is most important, the difference that makes the ultimate difference, is how far we grow as people. And the only way to grow really is to be stretched out of our comfortable places into uncomfortable places that open up new possibilities for us. That's what puts the radical in radical hospitality, and why I call it a spiritual practice. It isn't only for the person who comes to us seeking community. It helps us to, but it helps us to make room in our hearts, to make them bigger, more connected than we could ever have dreamed they could be. We are transformed in that process as well. We don't always know who sacrificed their comfort so that we might have some room to connect at this church. The angels unaware could be the new people we meet at church or elsewhere in life, but we could be the unaware angels, angels that don't know that they're angels. That's what it kind of sounds like in that King James version of Hebrews 13, verse 2. It isn't the people doing the entertaining that are unaware, but the angels themselves are unaware of themselves as angels. Things that we do for others ripple out and have unknown consequences. That is, after all, the moral of the story of the long spoons. What we do for others ripples out from our individual actions, that we are to think of others first before ourselves. Now, people are not turning up to church literally with long spoons looking to eat food, but they are coming to our congregation hungry for something. They're hungry for that connection to a real life person. The power of the church in normal circumstances is that community is built face-to-face, person-to-person. However, we take what we can get in these strange days. We can build connections virtually too. As one of our hymns say, our spirits long to be made whole. What we're really hungry for is the time and the space to tell our story. Remember the 100 million castaways Sting sang about, writing messages in bottles and throwing them into the sea. Those are the people who need to tell their story, yearning to make some real connection with another person. Church is the place where we come to tell our story and to find familiar moments that resonate with us within another person's story. Thus, deep listening is fundamental to the practice of radical hospitality. Only when we're able to set aside our own need to be heard will we be able to make room for others to tell their story. As members of the church, we get to share our stories all the time. It is an act of kindness and an act of faith to make room for another so that they get the chance to share theirs. Let us be quick to listen. Listening is always at the heart of pastoral ministry, regardless of what it is and who's doing it. And I don't mean merely hearing sounds of another person's voice. Deep listening means that we're listening for the heartbreak that underlies those words, that we're open and empathetic to what really needs to be said, even when that person is saying it is scared and vulnerable. Church isn't scary to us because we have been here talking to the same people for many years. But someone new to us doesn't know, does not share that confidence. They're testing the waters, trying to find a safe harbor for their tender story. Radical hospitality is the practice of reassuring them that yes, we will listen to you here, regardless of how marginalized or unusual that story might be. Our message of universalism includes everyone. It's the most radical theological statement one can ever make. It is how we feed each other and make a heaven a reality on earth. Now, normally in a parable, there's one figure the speaker wants the listener to emulate, the Good Samaritan, for example. But in my earlier parable of the small New England church, both characters can be found with some flaws. The board president thought that the church would grow just by a matter of board resolution. when in fact it is a willing transformation of the heart and culture of the church. That said, at least she was trying, which is a great deal more than can be said for Bob, the crotchety treasurer. He's 180 degrees away from radical hospitality. His line, I joined the church the hard way and so should they, is funny because we know that too often we act like that. It might not get said out loud bluntly, but if you aren't going out of your way to practice radical hospitality, that's the message our church is sending. We turn away angels without knowing it. We fail at one of our most important religious tasks, to give comfort to the lonely. Rather than turning away angels unaware, let us become the unaware angels, the angels to and for other people without them ever realizing it. When we act for others, when we make room in our lives and in our community for others, then we become the angels. Let us never forget this. May we live our lives for others. May there always be room for one more in our church. May we never lose our enthusiasm for practicing radical hospitality for strangers and old friends alike. And may our church thrive with a culture of deep listening. I love all you angels. Go in peace. Amen. Please join now in singing hymn number 213, There's a Wideness in Your Mercy. The words will appear on your screen.